Talia Brooks smoothed the front of her borrowed emerald gown and reminded herself, for the third time in 10 minutes, that she was allowed to be in this room. The Ashford Grand Ballroom glittered with the kind of wealth that made the air itself feel expensive, chandeliers dripping crystal light over marble floors polished so bright she could see the blurred shape of her own reflection beneath her heels. She was not a guest. She was the assistant event coordinator, the one who had spent the last 6 hours confirming seating charts, correcting a florist's mistake with the centerpieces, and calming down a caterer who had nearly set the kitchen on fire over a soufflé. Her boss had ordered her into the gown at the last minute because a photographer wanted the event staff to blend in for a magazine spread, and Talia had not argued, because arguing with Diane Castellano over anything was a losing proposition. So she stood near the edge of the dance floor in silk she could never have afforded herself, trying to look like she belonged, and trying even harder not to think about how her feet already ached in these shoes. She was 22 years old, 6 months out of a hospitality management degree she was still paying off, and she had learned quickly that rich people's parties ran on the invisible labor of people like her. She watched the room the way she always did, cataloging exits, waitstaff rotations, the location of the fire doors, because old habits from working retail during hurricane season never really left a person. That was when she felt it. A shift in the air, subtle as a held breath, moving through the crowd the way cold water moves through a warm bath. She looked up and understood immediately why. He had walked in without any announcement, without any need for one, wearing a black suit so precisely tailored it looked less like clothing and more like a second skin grafted onto discipline itself. His hair was dark and combed back with a severity that suggested he did not tolerate disorder in any form, not on his head and not in his empire. His eyes found the room before the room found him, sweeping once, cataloging, the way a man does when he has learned that safety is never guaranteed and always earned. Talia did not know his name yet. She only knew, the way you know a storm is close before the sky tells you, that whoever this man was, he was the kind of danger polite society dressed up and called important. His name was Jaehyun Moon, and every person who mattered in that ballroom knew it, even if they pretended otherwise over champagne flutes and small talk about charity funding. He ran the import business that had made 3 separate city councilmen wealthy in ways they never discussed publicly, and beneath that legitimate front ran an organization with roots stretching from Seoul to Los Angeles to this very city, an organization that dealt in things far heavier than shipping containers. Jae-hyun moved through the crowd the way water moves around stone, acknowledging just enough to be polite, giving nothing that could be used against him. Tonight, he had a single purpose. Tonight, he intended to propose to Marissa Vaughn, the woman his family had spent 2 years steering him toward, the daughter of a shipping magnate whose business ties would consolidate power in a way that made sense on paper and felt like ash in his mouth. He had the ring in his breast pocket, a flawless 3-carat stone set in platinum, cold and heavy against his chest like a verdict he had already accepted. He found Marissa near the string quartet, laughing at something with the practiced brightness of a woman who had learned young that beauty was currency and charm was collateral. She saw him coming and her smile sharpened into something more calculating, more aware of the cameras nearby. Jae-hyun reached into his jacket, feeling for the small velvet box, and that was the exact moment the entire evening detonated into chaos. A server rushing past with a tray of champagne collided hard with Marissa's date, sending the man stumbling directly into Jae-hyun's shoulder at the worst possible angle, and Jae-hyun's hand, already closed around the ring box, jerked wide as he caught his own balance. The box slipped from his fingers. It hit the marble floor and popped open, and the ring skated across the polished surface like a coin flicked by a careless hand, spinning to a stop against the toe of a stranger's shoe. That stranger was Talia. She looked down, startled, at the ring glinting near her foot, and before she could even process what was happening, Jae-hyun was moving toward her with the fluid, unbothered urgency of a man used to controlling every variable in a room. He crouched, retrieved the ring in one clean motion, and rose to his full height directly in front of her, so close she could smell cedar and something smoky beneath it, some cologne note she could not name but would remember for the rest of her life. The quartet had stopped playing. Conversations died in overlapping waves as heads turned toward the small commotion near the dance floor. Jae-hyun, flustered for perhaps the first time in a decade, and operating on pure reflex born from a childhood where hesitation had once cost him everything, took her hand before his mind caught up with his body and slid the ring onto her finger to keep it from falling again, the way a man secures anything precious that has nearly slipped from his grasp. The room did not gasp so much as inhale collectively, a hell breath of 200 wealthy strangers watching the most dangerous man in the city kneel, in effect, before a caterer's assistant in a borrowed dress. Marissa's laughter cut off entirely. Her face went the color of the tablecloths, then flooded red with a fury she fought to keep from her features for the sake of the cameras still flashing near the entrance. Talia stood frozen, the ring cold and enormous on her finger, staring up into the face of a man she had never seen before in her life, a man whose eyes, she realized with a jolt she did not want to examine, were not cold at all up close. They were dark, nearly black, but there was something moving underneath the surface of them, something calculating and alive. Jae-hyun realized what he had done half a second after he had done it. He did not apologize. He did not immediately correct it. Instead, he held her gaze for one long moment, the kind of moment that stretches far past what is socially acceptable, and something in his jaw tightened, like a man recalculating an equation he thought he had already solved. Talia found her voice first because someone had to. "This is not mine," she said, and began working the ring off her finger, only to find it did not want to move easily, swollen slightly from the champagne she had allowed herself one glass of during setup. "I am so sorry," she added quickly, glancing past him toward the woman in the ivory gown whose expression had curdled into something dangerous. "That belongs to her, I am sure." Jae-hyun did not reach for it. He watched her fingers struggle against the metal band, and something in him, some part he had buried under years of duty and inherited obligation, found the moment absurdly, inconveniently human. "Leave it," he said, his voice low and even, carrying easily despite its quiet register. "It clearly does not want to leave yet." Around them the whispers had already begun to multiply, and somewhere near the bar a phone was undoubtedly recording. Marissa crossed the space between them with the deliberate control of a woman raised to never make a scene in public even while she wanted to. "Jae-hyun," she said, a tight smile stretched over teeth that could have cut glass, "is this some kind of joke?" He turned to her, and Talia watched the mask slide back over his face instantly, cold and composed, the man from the doorway returning in full. "It was an accident," he said simply. Nothing more. But even as he said it, something in his tone lacked the conviction that would have ended the conversation cleanly, and Marissa heard it too. The story could have ended there, an embarrassing footnote to a gala that would be gossiped about for a week and then forgotten, except for what happened next. A man near the entrance, tall, with a scar along his jaw that had gone pale with age, was watching the entire scene unfold with an intensity that had nothing to do with romantic curiosity. His name was Doyeon Baek, and he had spent the last 4 months waiting for exactly this kind of opening, a public moment of chaos where Jae-hyun Moon's guard might drop enough to create an opportunity. Doyeon had once been loyal to the Moon organization, had once called Jae-hyun's late father a mentor, before a dispute over territory and a betrayal buried so deep in the family's history that even Jae-hyun did not know the full truth of it had turned him into an enemy who smiled at galas and plotted in private rooms. Doyeon saw the ring on the stranger's hand and understood, faster than anyone else in the ballroom, that this woman had just become useful to him in ways she could not possibly imagine. He raised his phone, not to record gossip, but to send a message to 2 men waiting outside in a black sedan. "Find out who she is," he typed. "We may have just been handed something valuable." Talia finally worked the ring loose and held it out toward Jae-hyun with visible relief, wanting nothing more than to disappear into the kitchen and pretend the last 90 seconds had not happened. He did not take it immediately. "Keep it a moment longer," he said quietly, low enough that only she could hear. "I need everyone in this room to believe I meant to do that, or the story that spreads by morning will be far worse than the truth." Talia stared at him, baffled by the request and by the strange steadiness in his voice, a man giving instructions in the middle of his own unraveling. I do not even know your name, she said. Jae-hyun Moon, he said, and something about the way he said it, plain and unadorned, without the practiced charm most powerful men use to introduce themselves, made her believe he rarely had to say it to anyone who did not already know it. And you are, he asked. Talia Brooks, she answered, still holding her hand slightly away from her body as if the ring might detonate. I work event coordination. I am not part of your world, whatever this is. Jae-hyun's mouth curved, not quite a smile, more the shadow of one. No, he agreed. You're not. That may be exactly why this happened. Diane Castellano appeared at Talia's elbow within a minute, her face pale beneath her makeup, gripping Talia's arm hard enough to bruise. What did you do? She hissed. Talia opened her mouth to explain that she had done absolutely nothing except stand near a ring that had rolled toward her shoe, but Diane was already pulling her away from the small crowd, already apologizing to nearby guests with the practiced desperation of an event planner watching her career flash before her eyes. Jae-hyun watched them go, his expression unreadable to everyone but the one person in the room who had learned, over 15 years of loyalty and blood, to read every flicker of his composure. That person, his second-in-command, a broad-shouldered man named Taeyong-soo who had been at Jae-hyun's side since they were both young enough to still believe the world was fair, stepped up beside him once Marissa had stormed off toward the terrace with her father trailing behind her, already on his phone. You're going to have to fix this before morning, Taeyong said under his breath. The shipping deal depends on Vaughn believing this family takes the alliance seriously. Jae-hyun did not look away from the direction Talia had disappeared. I am aware, he said. Taeyong followed his gaze and frowned. That woman has nothing to do with any of this. She is a civilian. Jae-hyun's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She does now, he said, and there was something in the certainty of his voice that Taeyong had heard only a handful of times before, always right before Jae-hyun made a decision no one else in the room agreed with. By the time Talia reached the staff corridor behind the kitchen, her hands were shaking, though she told herself it was adrenaline and not the memory of dark eyes holding hers a beat too long. Diane was already on the phone with the venue's owner, trying to control a narrative that had, in the span of 90 seconds, become the most talked-about moment of the season. Talia leaned against the cool tile wall and closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing, trying to convince herself that this would blow over by tomorrow, that she would go back to being invisible the way she had always been in rooms like this. She did not yet understand that invisibility was no longer available to her. Outside, in the black sedan idling near the service entrance, one of Doyeon's men had already confirmed her name, her employer, and the address of the small apartment she shared with her cousin 2 neighborhoods over. Information moved fast in Doyeon's world, faster than kindness ever did, and by the time Talia finally slipped out of her heels in the back of a rideshare home that night, exhausted and confused, and trying not to think about the stranger's cologne still clinging faintly to her memory, a decision had already been made in a much darker corner of the city that would ensure this was not, in fact, the end of anything. 3 days passed in which Talia tried, with limited success, to return to her ordinary life. Diane had not fired her, mostly because the gala's viral moment had somehow generated more publicity for the venue than any successful event ever could. Video clips of the mysterious proposal that wasn't racking up views from strangers speculating about who the woman in green was and whether Jae-hyun Moon had truly meant to slip a ring onto a stranger's hand. Talia avoided her phone as much as she could, deleting notifications, ignoring the article a local blog had posted with a blurry screenshot of her face beside the headline Mafia air stunned city with public proposal mishap. She told herself it would fade. She was wrong. On the 4th evening, walking home from a late shift at the restaurant she worked at on weekends to cover the gap her internship stipend never quite closed, she became aware of a car slowing beside her on the mostly empty street, matching her pace with unhurried precision. Her pulse spiked immediately, every self-defense class she had ever half paid attention to snapping into focus. She quickened her step, cutting toward a lit convenience store, and the car's window slid down. Miss Brooks, a voice said, calm and low, and she recognized it instantly even before she turned. Jae-hyun sat in the back of a car she had not noticed idling nearby before, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "I need 5 minutes," he said. "I would not ask if it were not necessary." Talia stopped walking but did not approach the car. "You do not get 5 minutes of my time by showing up in the dark like this," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "That is how people end up on the news for the wrong reasons." Something in his face flickered, an acknowledgement of the fair point. "You are right," he said, and stepped out of the car himself, hands visible, posture deliberately unthreatening in a way she suspected he had learned specifically because his presence rarely needed to be threatening to feel dangerous. "I would not have come at all except that you are in danger, and it is because of what happened at the gala." Talia felt the cold spread through her chest before her mind even processed the words fully. "What are you talking about?" she said. Jae-hyun's jaw tightened. "There is a man named Doyeon Baek," he said. "He was once loyal to my family. He is not anymore. He saw what happened between us at the party and he believes, correctly, that it gave him leverage he did not have 24 hours earlier. He has already had you followed. He knows where you live." Talia's mouth went dry. "Why would any of this matter to him?" she asked. "I put a ring on your finger by accident," she said, though even as the words left her mouth she understood, with sinking clarity, exactly how such a small accident could look like an opening to someone hunting for one. "Because it made you visible," Jae-hyun said quietly. "And in my world, visibility is a kind of danger all its own." She wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it, to tell him this was not her problem, that she had a rent payment due and a shift in the morning and no interest whatsoever in becoming a footnote in a crime family's power struggle. Instead, she found herself staring at him under the flickering convenience store sign, searching his face for the lies she was certain must be there, and finding none. "What do you want from me?" she asked finally. Jae-hyun held her gaze. "I want you safe," he said. "I did not choose this for you, but I put that ring on your hand and whatever else I am, I do not let harm come to people because of my mistakes. Not if I can prevent it." Talia crossed her arms, unwilling to let the moment soften her too quickly. "And how exactly do you prevent it?" she asked. "By keeping you somewhere I can watch, at least until I understand how far Doyeon intends to take this," he said. "I know it is an enormous thing to ask a stranger." Talia studied him a long moment, weighing the absurdity of the request against the genuine unease pooling in her stomach at the thought of a man she had never heard of already knowing her address. "Give me tonight to think," she said finally, "and do not follow me home again without asking first." Something almost like respect passed over Jae-hyun's face. "Understood," he said, and it was clear from his tone that very few people in his life were permitted to set terms with him and have those terms honored, and that he was choosing, deliberately, to honor hers. That night proved him right in the worst possible way. Talia woke near 2 in the morning to the sound of her apartment door lock being tested, a slow metallic scrape that no innocent late-night visitor would make. Her cousin Renata was staying at her boyfriend's that week, leaving Talia alone in an apartment with a lock that suddenly felt embarrassingly flimsy. She grabbed her phone with shaking hands, torn between calling the police and remembering, with a jolt of clarity, the card Jae-hyun had pressed into her palm before leaving the convenience store parking lot, insisting she keep it in case anything felt wrong before he could arrange proper protection. She dialed the number on it instead, whispering into the phone the moment it connected. "Someone is trying to get into my apartment," she breathed. "Stay away from the door." Jae-hyun's voice came back immediately, sharp and alert in a way that told her he had not been asleep either. "Go to your bedroom, lock that door too, and do not make a sound. I am 15 minutes away." 15 minutes felt like an eternity crouched behind her bedroom door, listening to the front lock finally give way, listening to careful footsteps move through her small living room, searching for something or someone. She held her breath as the footsteps paused directly outside her bedroom door, a shadow shifting beneath the gap at the bottom, and for one suspended moment, she believed with total certainty that she was about to die in her own apartment over a stranger's ring. The footsteps retreated abruptly at the sound of a car screeching to a stop outside, and by the time Jae-hyun kicked the front door open moments later, gun drawn with the calm economy of a man who had done this more times than any legitimate businessman should ever need to, the intruder was gone, slipped out through the fire escape into the dark. Talia emerged from her bedroom trembling, and Jae-hyun crossed the room to her without hesitation, his hands hovering near her shoulders as though he wanted to hold her steady, but was not certain he had the right. "Are you hurt?" he asked, voice low, urgent. She shook her head, unable to speak for a moment, adrenaline and fear crashing through her all at once. He did not touch her further, simply stayed close, a solid and watchful presence in the wreckage of her ordinary life. "This was Doyeon's message," he said finally, his voice tight with a fury he was visibly working to control. "He wanted me to know he could reach you whenever he chose." Talia found her voice at last, and it came out sharper than she expected. "Then he needs to know I am not someone who runs," she said. Jae-hyun looked at her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes, an expression she would later come to recognize as the exact moment he stopped seeing her as an accident to be managed and started seeing her as someone worth protecting for her own sake. She agreed, against every instinct of self-preservation, to stay temporarily in a secured property his organization maintained across the city, reasoning that whatever chaos she had accidentally wandered into, she could not fight it from an apartment with a lock a child could pick. The safe house, as Taeyong grimly called it when he arrived to oversee the transition, was a converted loft with reinforced windows and 2 armed men stationed discreetly near the entrance, a level of security that made the reality of her situation land with new and heavier weight. Jae-hyun visited each evening under the guise of briefing her on developments, though both of them understood, without ever saying so aloud, that the visits had begun to matter for reasons that had nothing to do with security briefings. She learned, over those visits, fragments of who he truly was beneath the tailored suits and controlled stillness. She learned that his father had been murdered when Jae-hyun was only 19, betrayed by a man he had trusted like an uncle, and that the betrayal had taught Jae-hyun, brutally and early, that loyalty was the only currency that mattered in his world because blood alone guaranteed nothing. She learned that years later, before his father's death had even fully finished reshaping him, he had loved a woman named Hannah who worked as a translator for one of his father's legitimate export contracts, a woman with no connection to his world who had simply wanted to build a quiet life, and that Doyeon, in the earliest stages of his betrayal, had ordered her killed to send Jae-hyun a message about what loyalty and defiance would cost him. Jae-hyun had buried that woman without ever telling anyone outside his innermost circle that he had loved her, and had spent every year since building walls precise enough that no one could ever again be used against him that way. "I am telling you this," he said quietly one evening, sitting across from her at the small kitchen table in the loft, "because you deserve to understand exactly what danger you have been pulled into, and exactly why I cannot allow it to happen again to someone else." Talia studied his face in the low light, seeing past the composed exterior to something rawer beneath it. "You did not choose to fall for her, and you did not choose this either," she said carefully. "None of this is your fault." Jae-hyun's expression tightened. "It became my fault the moment I let her matter to me," he said. "And it will become my fault again if I let you matter and fail to protect you." Talia felt something crack open in her chest at the admission, the accidental confession folded inside his warning. "You already let me matter," she said quietly. "That is why we are having this conversation." Jae-hyun did not deny it. Instead, he reached across the table, not quite touching her hand, close enough that the air between them felt charged with everything neither of them had said aloud yet. "I am aware," he said, voice rough at the edges in a way she had not heard from him before. Doyeon, watching from a distance through informants embedded in Jae-hyun's outer circle, grew impatient with the slow unraveling of his plan and decided a direct escalation was required. He sent word through an intermediary that he wished to negotiate, proposing a meeting at neutral ground, a warehouse near the old shipping docks that had once belonged to Jae-hyun's father before territorial lines had shifted violently in Doyeon's favor. Jae-hyun knew instantly it was a trap disguised as diplomacy, but declining risked signaling weakness that would embolden every rival watching the situation unfold. He resolved to attend with Taeyong and a small, trusted contingent, leaving explicit instructions that Talia was to remain secured at the loft under no circumstances. Talia had other plans. She had spent 3 days observing the men who guarded her, learning names, learning patterns, learning that the youngest guard, a nervous man named Ho-jin barely older than she was, tended to step away from his post near the service exit precisely at shift change to check messages from a girlfriend he was not supposed to be dating while on duty. When word filtered through the loft that Jae-hyun had gone to the docks and something in the hushed, tense phone calls between Taeyang's remaining men suggested the meeting had gone badly, Talia made the decision that would change everything. She slipped out during the shift change gap she had memorized, taking nothing but her phone and the small folding knife her cousin had once given her for her birthday as a half-joke about city living, and caught a rideshare toward the docks using the address she had overheard one of the guards mention in a tense phone call. She arrived to find the warehouse district eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that precedes violence rather than follows it, and used the shadows along the perimeter fence the way she had once used store aisles to avoid an ex-boyfriend who would not take a hint, moving carefully, watching for patrol patterns. Through a gap in the corrugated metal siding she saw them, Jae-hyun standing rigid in the center of the warehouse floor, Taeyang and two other men positioned tensely nearby, and across from them Doyeon, flanked by four armed men, his scarred jaw set in the satisfied expression of a man who believed he had already won. This was never about a shipping deal, Doyeon was saying, his voice carrying easily in the cavernous space. This is about your father taking territory that belonged to my family for 2 generations before yours arrived, and decided history did not apply to you. Jae-hyun's voice, when he answered, was ice itself. My father built something from nothing while your family sold its own soldiers to survive. Do not speak to me about history you have already rewritten in your own favor. The exchange deteriorated with the speed of a match dropped into gasoline. Doyeon's men moved first, and violence exploded across the warehouse floor in a chaos of gunfire and shattering glass. Jae-hyun's small contingent outnumbered and forced back behind a row of shipping crates for cover. Talia, watching from her position at the fence line, felt every instinct scream at her to run, and ignored every one of them. She had spent years learning to read a room under pressure, first in her mother's chaotic household, then in restaurants where a kitchen fire could turn a normal night deadly in seconds, and that same instinct now told her exactly where the warehouse's secondary access point was, a loading door near the eastern wall that Doyeon's men had left unguarded because they assumed no one outside the fight would dare approach. She circled quickly, heart hammering, and slipped through the gap, moving low along stacked pallets until she reached a fuse box she had spotted from outside, one clearly wired into emergency lighting for the entire building. She yanked the main breaker down without hesitation, plunging the warehouse into sudden darkness broken only by the strobing flash of gunfire, and in that critical moment of confusion, as Doyeon's men lost their line of sight, and Jae-hyun's smaller group used the darkness to move and reposition with brutal efficiency, the balance of the fight shifted entirely. Jae-hyun, disoriented for only a heartbeat before his training reasserted itself, used the darkness with lethal precision, closing the distance on the nearest of Doyeon's men and disarming him with a single economical strike before turning his weapon on the second. Taeyang and the others pressed their advantage in the chaos, and within moments the exchange had turned decisively against Doyeon, who found himself suddenly exposed, his remaining men scattered or subdued. Someone flipped a portable light back on near the entrance, and in the sudden illumination Doyeon found himself staring down the barrel of Jae-hyun's weapon, breathing hard, his composure finally, completely broken. You should have stayed loyal to my father, Jae-hyun said quietly, and there was no theater in it, only the flat finality of a man who had spent years imagining this exact moment. Before Doyeon could respond, movement near the eastern wall caught every eye in the room, and Talia stepped fully into the light, breathing hard, the fuse box behind her still smoking faintly from the makeshift override she had rigged. Every gun in the room that was not already trained on Doyeon swung toward her for one terrible second before Jae-hyun's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Do not, he said, low and absolute, and the weapons lowered. Talia, he said, and his voice cracked slightly on her name in a way she had never heard from him before, unguarded and raw. What are you doing here? I was not going to sit somewhere safe while you walked into an ambush, she said, her chest heaving, adrenaline making her hands shake even as her voice stayed steady. You did not choose this either, and I decided I was not going to let you carry it alone. Doyeon, still frozen at gunpoint, let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "She cut your power," he said, staring at Talia with something between fury and grudging astonishment. This civilian outmaneuvered trained men. Jae-hyun did not look away from Talia even as he addressed Doyeon. "She is not a civilian," he said. "She never was, not from the moment I put that ring on her hand. What happens now was inevitable the second you decided to use her against me instead of leaving her alone." He gestured, and two of his men moved to secure Doyeon properly, disarming him fully, while Taeyong radioed for a cleanup crew accustomed to handling situations that could never reach the police. Doyeon, defeated and finally silent, was led away toward a fate the story would not need to detail, his territory and his loyalists absorbed within days back under the authority his betrayal had once tried to steal. In the aftermath, standing amid overturned crates and the acrid smell of spent gunpowder, Jae-hyun crossed the space to Talia in 3 long strides and stopped close enough that she had to tilt her head back to hold his gaze. "You could have died tonight," he said, his voice rough, stripped of every careful measure she had come to associate with him. "I know," she said simply. "So could you. That is exactly why I came." Jae-hyun studied her for a long moment, something fierce and unguarded moving behind his eyes. "I told myself keeping you close was about protecting you," he said finally. "I've been lying to myself since the moment that ring hit the floor." Talia felt her breath catch, the warehouse and the danger, and the smoke all narrowing down to the small charged space between them. "Then stop lying," she said quietly. He closed the distance between them, and there was nothing hesitant left in it, his hand rising to frame her jaw with a gentleness that felt entirely at odds with the violence still smoking around them, and when he kissed her it was deliberate, certain, the exact opposite of an accident. She kissed him back without hesitation, her hand fisting in the lapel of a suit jacket that had survived a gunfight better than most men would have, and for one long moment the entire warehouse, the entire war he had been fighting since he was 19 years old, fell away into something quieter and far more dangerous than any rival family had ever been. They pulled apart slowly, breathing unevenly, and Taeyong cleared his throat pointedly from several feet away, clearly torn between relief and exasperation at the timing of it all. "There is still a cleanup to manage," he said dryly, "and a shipping deal that likely no longer matters given how tonight went." Jae-hyun did not step back from Talia, keeping one hand at the small of her back, as though unwilling yet to relinquish the physical proof that she was safe and present and real. "Cancel the Vaughn arrangement entirely," he said without hesitation. "Tell them the alliance no longer serves either family's interests." Taeyong's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded and moved off to make the call, leaving Jae-hyun and Talia alone amid the wreckage. "You just ended a business deal worth a great deal of money because of one gunfight and one kiss," Talia said, half disbelieving, half something warmer she did not yet have a name for. Jae-hyun looked down at her, and for the first time since she had met him, the mask was entirely absent from his face. "I ended it because I finally understand the difference between an alliance built on obligation and something built on choice," he said. "I choose this. I choose you. I am done pretending otherwise for the sake of people who never once asked what I actually wanted." In the weeks that followed, the city's gossip columns eventually moved on to newer scandals, the story of the mysterious ring and the woman in green fading into local legend rather than ongoing controversy. Talia did not return to invisibility, not entirely, though she returned to her work, to her cousin's apartment with a far sturdier lock installed at Jae-hyun's insistence, to the rhythms of an ordinary life that had been irrevocably widened by the extraordinary danger she had walked through and survived on her own terms. She was not defined by him, and he made certain, in the quiet, unglamorous moments between them that no headline ever captured, that she never needed to be. He learned to sit in her small kitchen without a security detail hovering at the door, learned to laugh, actually laugh, at something other than calculated amusement, learned that loyalty built on choice rather than fear tasted entirely different than anything his old world had ever offered him. She learned that the calculating stillness that had first unsettled her in that ballroom was, underneath it all, simply the discipline of a man who had survived by never letting anyone see him unguarded until he decided, deliberately, that she was worth the risk of being seen. Neither of them spoke of weddings or forever. Not yet, because both of them understood that whatever this was, it had been built in fire and chosen freely, and it did not need a ceremony to make it real. What it needed, and what it had, was the quiet certainty of two people who had faced down the worst version of his world together and walked out the other side still holding on. If you have made it this far into the story, thank you for spending this time with me, and if Talia and Jaehyun's story kept you hooked until the very end, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more dark romance narrations just like this one, and drop a comment telling me which part had you holding your breath the most, because stories like this only keep coming if you let me know you want them.